Yet transport and connectivity aren't just about movement. It also determines where homes are built, where towns grow, and where communities can thrive. And this connectivity is not only a keystone for enhancing quality of life, but also for enhancing and for improving and securing economic prosperity of those who live throughout the island, and indeed for ensuring that the country becomes an attractive place for people to live and to work, and for people to come to invest in and to visit. That having been said, there will be an ever-increasing need to focus our minds on decarbonising our transport sector, and investing in the need to invest in low carbon options such as rail and electric vehicle infrastructure. So the task ahead is considerable. The requirements demanded are to some extent novel, where previous generations of policymakers had the luxury of perhaps purely focusing on development and infrastructure. We have to do the same while also ensuring that our development does not come at the expense of the planet and the generations who will succeed us. It's our task then to hand future generations something better. New and innovative ideas will be needed to accomplish the twin task of developing reliable and efficient transport infrastructure, while also ensuring that it does not harm the air we breathe and the planet upon which we live. So the agenda is wide, the challenges are enormous, but I think the discussion will be insightful, will be stimulating, and there's much to hear from our expert panel today. So the only other task for me is to hand over to our friend Richard Bruton, my former colleague, our friend Richard Bruton, the former Minister Richard Bruton. I remember when Dick Springs stood down from politics, people used to constantly use the term former. He was former this and former that. And I remember him snapping at somebody one day, stop saying former. But anyway, Richard won't mind. He's very well known to you all. It's my pleasure to hand over to Richard Bruton.
Very much, Alex. I'll try and stay out of this as much as possible and let the fantastic panel we have speak for themselves. I like Alex, I was Minister for Climate, and so I have an intense interest in this subject. Also like to recognise Martin Manser, a former colleague of ours who is in the audience. He represents a rural constituency, unlike both myself and Alex. So we really are fortunate. Deloitte, Stephen Mohan has put together a very good team here, and he will say a word at the very end just to acknowledge the work that they've put into this. And we have, I suppose, someone who's from the TII doing the job, someone from the academic background who is looking at, the principles of how the job should be done, and someone from the consultancy background who, I suppose, advises and looks at best practice in other jurisdictions that might influence our thinking. So really good panel. They are, as I say, Rachel Cahill, Debbie Hopkins, and Stephen Prendeville. So without further ado, just to give you an outline of the way this will run, I'll give 7 minutes each to each of the speakers. Then there will be a 10-minute slot when the speakers can dispute one another's version of events if they wish to. And at that stage, I hope you will be thinking up questions and answers and comments. I think more emphasis on questions than long comments, but I'm sure you know the drill. We also have people online, and I have a little pad here that will tell me what questions are coming in from people online. So we try to make sure that everyone is included. So without further ado, just to introduce Rachel, she's a Director of Executive Office with Transport Infrastructure Ireland and leads key strategic cross-organisational initiatives and programmes, most noticeably TII's Sustainability and Climate Action Strategy. Rachel is a chartered accountant with 20 years experience working in transport and mobility sector. Prior to joining TII, Rachel spent 10 years working in the banking industry in both operational and financial roles. And Rachel sponsored and led the development of a very interesting project, Travelling in Women's Shoes, studying and reporting a report that was published in 2020. And it's the first of its kind that gives a perspective as to how well we're meeting the expectations of women who are part of the travelling public. So without further ado, over to you, Rich.
Very much, Richard, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon to take part in this panel discussion, so thank you very much for inviting me here today. I thought I'd start off by introducing Transport Infrastructure Ireland, or TII for short. Our purpose is to provide sustainable transport infrastructure and services, ensuring that our national road network and our light rail network are safe and resilient, delivering better accessibility and sustainable mobility for people and goods. Just by way of context, over the last 25 years, we have developed and delivered the national road network in partnership with 31 local authorities. It's probably the biggest public asset that we have, spanning 5,500 kilometres, and it has a value of about 32 billion euros, so it's a significant public asset. We operate, maintain, and continue to improve the national road network, this continues to be a key priority for us at TII. Over the past 20 years, we have developed and delivered the light rail network, our Luas that runs through our city, Dublin City, and we've done this in partnership with the National Transport Authority. So that's really where we've come from. So looking forward and to the future and how we can enhance transport infrastructure for a prosperous Ireland, there were three themes I was going to discuss today. So the first theme really is talking about Luas and light rail in general. Light rail is a high capacity, energy efficient and low carbon transport, sustainable transport mode. Luas is at the heart of Dublin's public transport network, and it really has a significant contribution in shifting people out of their cars onto more sustainable forms of transport. It provides a convenient and attractive alternative to the car, and it efficiently moves large volumes of people between work, home and play or leisure. We have seen firsthand over the last 20 years the success of Luas, being the catalyst for economic development and also unlocking housing delivery, really creating a more productive and efficient capital city. So we'd like to see more light rail, more Luas in Dublin, and also more light rail in our capital major cities of Cork and Galway. I've just brought a report today. If anybody's interested particularly in looking at the last 20 years of Luas, the benefits of Luas over the last 20 years, it's quite amazing how quickly 20 years goes by. This is available on our website. It's a really easy, accessible report full of pictures and graphs and numbers, but I'd really recommend that people have a look at that. So before I move on then to, I just want to talk about Metrolink. Metrolink will transform Dublin's public transport network. It's again a mega public transport project. It's the first of its kind in Ireland. It's a high capacity, high frequency, a modern metro railway that will have 16 stations between Swords and Charlemont. I think my colleague Michelle might be here somewhere today. I'm not sure if anybody of my TII colleagues, she's brought the Metrolink VR virtual reality set. So anybody who's interested in looking to see what some of the metro stations might look like, I'd really recommend that you have a look at that. I'm not exactly sure where the VR is set up. Oh, it's here. There you go. So actually, I should have seen, we have the map here of our 16 stations, but I'd really recommend people have a look at that perhaps after. The second theme I'd like to talk about today is the role of the national roads and their impact on societies and communities. High quality national roads allow for the safe movement of people and goods, and they contribute to the economic and social fabric of Ireland. The national road network is the backbone of the Irish economy and carries 90% of the interurban freight movements across the country. Connectivity is a critical priority and it's so important. And the national road network facilitates this, in particular regional and rural accessibility. Some of the projects that will come through in the second half of the NDP will improve accessibility to areas like the northwest of Ireland and also to the south of Ireland. So specific projects to call out include the Donegal 10T project, and I'm sure my colleague Stephen, who lives in Donegal, will be looking forward to that. But that really will enhance that area, the regional and rural area in the northwest. And also the N20, M20 Cork to Limerick project will also enhance the corridors in the south. Looking at a prosperous Ireland, it's the theme of the talk today. The national road network is vital for international connectivity and competitiveness. So this brings our ports into play. So projects like the N28 Cork to Ringaskiddy scheme will greatly enhance the freight corridors in that area, which will strengthen our links with the UK and mainland Europe. The third theme, the last theme, couldn't come here today without talking about decarbonisation. Obviously, it's so important for all sorts of reasons. So TII, we are delivering high-powered EV infrastructure charging along the national road network. And I guess the key thing here, we have a number of grant schemes in play at the moment, which will deliver the infrastructure that is required across the country. Delivering the infrastructure is one thing, but really it's about building the relationships and the partnerships that are required with the energy sector. One sector cannot do it without the other, and that's something that we have been working very, very closely with the energy sector over the past 2 years. Looking at cycling and their cycling network, we developed the National Cycling Network Plan on behalf of the department at the end of 2020, published at the end of 2023, and we're beginning to implement that National Cycling Network. It's a significant program that will span about 3,500 kilometers. It will connect about 200 settlements. So really, when you're talking about people, individual people, it'll touch about 2.8 in terms of population. So it's a significant program. I'd like to talk about tackling behavioural change, which is a key element when you're looking to deliver and implement sustainable transport modes. It's a huge challenge, and research really is at the core of tackling behavioural change. So Richard mentioned as part of the bio, so TII, we carried out research in 2020 and we published a report called Travelling in a Woman's Shoes. And the data and insights from this report really highlight that men and women have different mobility realities. And this really needs to be understood when you're developing new transport policy and designing new transport infrastructure. Since the report, and I actually have it here again, I'm plugging all of TI's reports. It's quite a different report. It's not something that you would normally see at a delivery agency, but I'd really recommend people take the time to have a look at this. Again, it's on our website. We after publishing this report, we developed what we're calling a gender checklist, which was to feed into the design of our future public transport projects. And we applied this gender checklist and gender lens for our latest Lewis scheme that's gone into planning recently, Lewis Finglas. And that was really in the bid to ensure that we really took on board the findings and the recommendations that came through that research. We also applied the research to our Metrolink, the design of some of the stations. So again, it's really trying to get under the bonnet of what some of the barriers that people with mobility challenges really we need to take account of. And the last thing I want to say under tackling behavioural change is just to mention briefly demand management. And the need for demand management measures, if we're really talking about trying to meet our carbon emissions targets, demand management has to be part of the equation. I know my colleagues in the department have done huge work in this space over the last 12 to 18 months with their Moving Together strategy. So really just to, I guess, call it out and to say that I definitely would expect to see more of demand management coming through future climate policies. So that's really all I want to say, and I'll pass over to Debbie.
Thanks very much indeed. You took exactly 7 minutes, so that was extraordinarily excellent, efficient. So Debbie Hopkins, who is the next to speak, is an associate professor in human geography at the University of Oxford. Debbie is editor-in-chief of the American Association of Geographers Review of Books Journal and sits on the editorial boards of the Journal of Transport Geography, Applied Mobilities, Tourism Geographies, and the Journal of Sustainable Tourism and Global Networks, and is an international research affiliate at the Centre of Sustainability at the University of Otago in, you have to help me with this, Aotearoa in New Zealand. Dr. Hopkins is currently working on projects focusing with the social dimensions of climate change, socio-technical transitions, and the mobility of people, goods, and waste, with a focus on cities and processes of urbanization. So that is a very impressive list. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming here today, and thank you very much for inviting me along. It's a real privilege to come and speak with you all and to think about some of the issues around infrastructure provision in the current age. We're at this time where there's so many things happening, as we heard at the very beginning, where we're needing to think about the economy and the instabilities. We're thinking about the political climate. we're thinking about the climate and the climate emergency. And there's this language of compounding, the ways that all of these issues come together, that they're not just simultaneously happening, but they're compounding and layering in ways that exacerbate certain problems, that create new time constraints, that spatially play out very differently from the local to the national to the global. They link us together, but they also create divisions in how we might respond. As an academic, I spend a lot of time thinking about words and concepts and ideas. And I hope that you will allow me to think about some of this with you now. I don't do it as an exercise of pontificating or delaying, but because this language is really important. So if we take the idea of prosperous, there's lots of different ways that we might think about a prosperous nation, who it is prosperous for, whose conceptualization, whose definition of prosperous gets forwarded. Whilst we would like to believe that everybody in this room, we've probably got a lot of things in common, given that we're here on this topic, we'd probably like to assume we'd have the same idea of what a prosperous nation would look like. But actually, I think if we started that conversation, we'd find that we would differ quite largely on the basis of who we are, what we want the country to look like into the future, where we've been, what academic training we have, disciplines that inform our ideas, and so on. Actually, if we went beyond this room, we would probably find greater still divergence on what prosperity looks like. And the issue there is, whose idea do we follow? And if we are forwarding one agenda for a prosperous nation, whose ideas are getting left behind? We have a range of deliberative processes that we can follow that go beyond participation, that allow us to engage with civic society, to engage with questions from diverse stakeholder groups. But this takes time, it takes process, it takes resources. It's not an easy thing to achieve. And as we were discussing over lunch, we don't want these processes if it's solely to collect ideas and move on anyway. So we need to think very carefully about whose ideas we take forward. In the time of climate crisis, we know that the climate emergency is something that needs to be at the front of our agendas. I still work with the language of sustainability. Sustainability is often thought to be something of a dirty word. Some people have thrown it out and they say, no, we need to be thinking about resilience, we need to be thinking about other concepts. I retain sustainability because I think it encourages us to think beyond the environment as an isolated sphere. In my perspective, we haven't solved the climate crisis if we exacerbate inequality, if we continue to create harm for some communities over others. The academic literature shows us that much of the activity that could forward an environmental sustainability agenda actually just benefits those who are benefiting from society anyway. It's helping us fundamentally, and it's not helping those on lower incomes, it's not helping those who aren't benefiting from our system. If we take this into transport, we can think of a number of examples off the top of our minds, things like electric vehicles, things like cycling. Now, I'm not choosing these examples to be problematic. They are things that need to be part of this transition and transformation towards sustainability, but they are not the silver bullet. On their own, they will create more conditions of exclusion. They are not things that are necessarily equally distributed throughout our societies and our communities. So this is something that we need to think very carefully about when we're investing in infrastructure, when we're thinking about who we are working to support. There are three intersecting questions that I'm going to now pose. So the first is, what urban centres do we want for Ireland, and what mobilities are enabled or constrained through these urban centres? How is housing affordability and availability tackled, and what transport is built into this process? And to what degree is road freight included in discussions of renewed ground transport infrastructure? The last question is really implicit in the former two questions, because my area of interest at the moment is really around road freight. So I've worked in transport decarbonisation for the last decade or so. And one of the things that has become really clear to me is that road freight is excluded from this. It's seen as secondary too. And often that's because it's seen to be a private sector concern. However, road freight uses public infrastructure all the time, and the strategies to create more livable, more environmentally sustainable communities often is contingent on more and more road freight movements. But those are often rubbing against one another. So if I think of the example of densifying urban areas, if we think about walkable communities, which many of us want, we then don't want HGVs, large trucks sat next to us. When we're riding our bikes down a bike lane, we don't want to share that road with heavy haulage. Yet to build the housing that we require, to build the infrastructure that we require, there are probably going to be more trucks on our roads. Without including it and making it a central component of our planning, our policy, we run the risk of creating more of these hazards, more road fatalities, more road injuries, not encouraging people onto their bikes because they don't feel safe to do so. I'm going to leave it there, and I look forward to questions later. Thank you.
No, thanks very much indeed. So our final speaker is Stephen Prendeville. He's a partner at Deloitte Ireland, leading their infrastructure, transport and regional government practice. Stephen is a core member of Deloitte's Sustainability Leadership Group, originally from Limerick, the Treaty County. Stephen moved to Canada in 2011, where he worked with large cities, including Toronto, Calgary, Vancouver, Edmonton, Montreal and Ottawa, to deliver sustainable mobility solutions, as well as climate and infrastructure resilience advisory services. His experience and work to date has included some of the largest and most complex infrastructure undertakings, covering over 50 billion euro in capital expenditure to date. Stephen has extensive experience in disruption and strategic advisory, transaction and commercial advisory, energy transition pathways. That's a real estate and urban development strategy. That is quite a range of integrated strategies there. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Wrote that myself. So it's hard to follow Rachel and Debbie. I'm going to try and put my own 3 themes into the mix, and try and build on some of the dialogue. And I don't know if you heard the Freudian slip earlier, but you know, we almost called Cork the capital of the country there earlier on. But it's interesting that Debbie then poses the question about, you know, what are the urban centres that we want, and that urban rural. Maybe she's weighing into the urban rural conversation there that we have in Ireland a lot, without necessarily knowing all of the backstory that exists. And maybe just to frame my first thought process around what it would take to enhance transportation. And Debbie did a good job in terms of the nuance of what a prosperous Ireland might look like. We're very deliberate in calling it a prosperous Ireland, not a prosperous Dublin, just to be careful with the conversation. Now, it's not that one denies another, but because we need a prosperous Dublin in order to have a prosperous Ireland. I think most people will acknowledge that that's the case. But it absolutely is important that we focus on the entire system. One of the things which didn't reach out is that I did a lot of work in North America on network system thinking, which is fundamentally the idea that you just can't think about one project in isolation. You can't do one thing in isolation. We have an awful habit of that in this country, right? We chunk down projects into things that are a certain size by a certain department that can be delivered under a certain mandate. And then whatever else happens afterwards is kind of a passive expectation. And that's despite the fact that an awful lot of the business cases that sit behind an awful lot of our work has an awful lot in it about realizing various benefits outside of the actual project itself. If anybody here has been involved in a bypass project, for example, we'll have the bypass projects about, yeah, it's increasing the speed and so on and so forth from getting to point A to point B, but then there'll also be these benefits to the local community from decongesting the various town or whatever it might be. But that various town or whatever it might be has no money to actually gain from that benefit. And we kind of let that stuff happen by osmosis to date. That's been our kind of place. Even the transportation system is kind of relatively passive. You know, Rachel put on the table that we need to talk about demand management. But actually up until now, we've had a few tolls obviously and things like that. Our experience with truly activating the transportation system is relatively light. We've built it, people use it, but we're not necessarily deliberately encouraging a particular behavior with that infrastructure. So I like to think about our transportation system as the cardiovascular system of the country. And I picked that analogy for a very specific reason. The first is that the heart of it It's not Cork. It really is Dublin. And we're days away maybe from a massive heart attack in the context of Dublin. Now, thankfully, we have a major infrastructure plan, which kind of amounts to basically quadruple bypass between Metrolink and Bus Connects and Dart Plus and various other congestion-based charges and so on. So I think Dublin has a really good plan and a pathway forward. But if we continue to feed the Dublin system with, continue the analogy, more blood, more traffic over the next 30 years, we'll be back where we started, right? So there is an element of we need to start controlling the inputs into the system a bit better. A lot of people will say, well, we don't have enough information to do this. We don't have enough information to do that. And actually, we should. We actually have the possibility in the next number of years with Gen AI and other tools to really build a massive digital map of not only the interactions on the arteries of the system, which Rachel mentioned that we've got, but all of the capillary systems that exist within our network. It is possible for us to start thinking about, well, when should freight come into various ports? When should the offloading of trucks happen at various areas? You know, we're probably not going to mess around with the school run, but is there other things that we should directly encourage so that we have an enhanced transportation system? The other extension of the analogy is we just cannot forget asset management and maintenance over the next while. Like we've built a $30 billion asset of national roads only, and that will take, I don't know what the number will be, probably 15 billion in the next 30 years just to keep it going in the right state. And then we have to enhance it for new technologies, for new accessibility, new requirements. Everybody looks at me and they say, oh, he's talking about autonomous vehicles. I'm not. I'm talking about LED lights creating new glare on the signage system. That means we've had to go around and paint all of them in a different thing so that we're not actually getting blinded by our own headlights. It can be as simple as that. So the first shout out for us to think about is, could we actually get to a digital twin, maybe even a democratized data system where we could all have a look at what's actually going on in the system? Could we get traffic lights and other things actually working at that level? Would Gen AI help us to do that? I would say it would. The second thing, and I kind of alluded to it, was, can we actually expand the definition of a transportation project in the context of the system? So we talk about stakeholder engagement, we talk about engaging with local communities, but an awful lot of that is we've had an idea for a project and we'll go and we'll tell you about it. Can we get to more of a radical collaboration? Now, a lot of people will say, well, Stephen, you're talking about something that's going to really slow things down. But what if we just did it between ourselves? And I mean that in the context of different parts of the transportation system actually just talking to themselves for a start. You know, from the private hauliers and the ports and the road network and the rail network. Like, you know, we talk, and I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble or anything like that, but, you know, Irish Rail know that they need people to get to the stations in the right way going forward. They know they have to work collaboratively with other elements of the public transport system to make that work. In Dublin, we know it all has to hang together between autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, mobility scooters, Lewis's, etc. And we're hitting a couple of the things that we're encountering over the last little while where those things are not lined up. We developed a framework in Deloitte with the economist in Duke University last year called Infrastructure for Good. Ireland actually scored really high in it. We came in 6th, 68 points out of 100. Loads of space for us to increase. And we dropped the one area where we were weak was in stakeholder engagement. Now that'll stick in everybody in the room's craw because they've been involved in public houses. We do an extensive amount of it, but it's the wrong kind. It's the kind that's really just there to justify getting on with a project as opposed to actually form a project. And the final thing, if we can, and this is again, maybe into the enhancing transportation idea, is we haven't really embraced mobility as a service, as a concept at all yet as a country. And we haven't done that for a number of reasons, and I know some of it is historic, but there's an element of, if we're going to improve the accessibility of the system, the options, and actually taking more of a behavioral change aspect to it, like putting information into the customer's hands, not the passenger, the customer's hands, making the transportation system less about just getting from A to B and actually as a product that's consumed, making sure that it's predictable, reliable, comfortable, safe, these kind of concepts that are really critical to improving the quality of the journey time. You think about, if I go back to the cardiovascular system just to finish it, our system is definitely under pressure. We're doing untold damage to the economy. We're the third most congested city in Dublin. And everybody kind of, the economists, there's probably a few economists in the room, they can tell you that that has had a cost and they'll number it in the billions. But it means nothing. But it is lost time, a lot of lost time in society, which breeds a whole host of societal issues, a whole host of things that are going on in people's lives that are exacerbated by the fact that they spent an extra hour in traffic in a week than they didn't have to. So there is an element of the system is getting us by, but it's not exactly healthy. And we kind of have to acknowledge that a little bit and kind of say, okay, well, the thing about it being a cardiovascular system is, like, for most of us, and I'm sitting on the stage and I'm realizing I'm not exactly the picture of health. There's an element of, yeah, but you'll get by. And it'll be a long time before the system will actually break, even though it's not actually optimized. It's not actually working at the level that it could be. So that's it for me, Richard.
Thanks very much indeed. Okay, well, before I throw it open to questions, maybe think about questions, maybe just ask the panel a few things. I'm intrigued with the comment that we need to move more towards mobility as a service, and the contrast you pitch between building the asset and managing its use, because, there people feel that if we build more roads, they will be immediately filled again. So I'm just wondering, what are the practical policy tools of mobility as a service? I mean, I think of, we have 3 million private vehicles, which are idle 98% of the time. Surely with your AI models, we can crack the need for such a large, which would then, we wouldn't have to have so many basements in our new apartments. We wouldn't, there's so many knock-on effects. So just what are the concepts of mobility as a service that might be practical for TII or policymakers?
So the first is an open, common data environment, right? Open, live, available data. What's going on out there? How many people leave for a new destination today without putting it into Google Maps first? I'm sorry, I'm labeling Google Maps. You might use another app, into an app to find out about that location. We never used to do that. You'd normally drive and you'd circle the block a couple of times and you'd find where you're going. Today we put it in because we want to know with some degree of certainty what you're getting into before you go out there, right? If you ask someone why they won't participate in a car sharing regime, maybe outside of Dublin, big part of it is certainty. Will it be there when I need it for my needs? And the reason we can't give them that certainty is there isn't enough data to support it. We can't tell where the cars are going to be. We can't tell really where the demand centers are going to be at that car-based level. Now, remove car for a moment. It's not about just car. Mobility as a service, at its heart, is about matching the right mobility solution for the right journey type. You don't need a car to run a kilometer down the road. You need an electric scooter, or you need an electric bike, or you need something. But equally, and maybe to pick up on Rachel's point, you can't assume that that's okay for everybody. So some users will need a car. Some mobility issues will need a particular type of service. So you can't be exclusionary in that context either. The reason, I suppose, that at the heart of the concept is you're putting the power in the consumer's hands, and the consumer then drives the solution demand. Think about that. It's a completely different mindset. Today, we will build Lewis for a capacity that we then will expect people to come in and use. And all history dictates that they will use it, right? And we've done loads of models to show that it will hoover up that much demand. 20 years. And it's undeniable, right? It's undeniable, but we build it that way. We build it and we'll expect it to come in. Mobility as a service will be the demand is created by the people on the data, and then providers will come and fulfill that demand. Now, you still need a backbone public transport system. It doesn't work if it's only mobility as a service. But then what you need from the national providers is you need them to integrate with the mobility as a service. You'll have this concept of last mile a lot of the time. Like Bus Connects will work really well if we get mobility as a service working on last mile, for example.
Sorry, can I ask just, Debbie, you made an interesting distinction between sustainability, which I used to be minister responsible for that, the 17 goals, and environmental protection. But I suppose with the Paris Agreement, everything has been set up in very rigid targets that we have to meet or hit compliance issues. So like in practical terms, EVs seem a very effective way of getting rid of fossil fuel in the short term. Like, how are policymakers expected to, handle these very specific obligations with the much higher sort of policy goals?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question, and it's at the heart of the issue. With sustainability, the reason that there's been a focus on the economy and on the environment is because we can quantify them. It's far more difficult to quantify gendered experiences of mobility. And so we get this real difficulty where we've fallen into a pattern of reporting. That reporting is very important. Dealing with the climate crisis is very important, but we can measure, we can create targets, we get people responding to that, and layers of reporting, as you say, that overlooks the fact that people live lives that are complicated and messy and can't always come down to numbers on spreadsheets. And I think that it's finding a place where policymakers, those implementing, those dealing with these issues, have the space to incorporate forms of data that aren't around just measurement. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be doing that. We very much need to be abiding by the Paris Agreement and sticking to our obligations. But going back to what I said before, from my perspective, we haven't dealt with the climate crisis if we have a more unequal society getting there. So if we have 30% of the population can drive electric vehicles, and we've driven down to net zero because we've offset the vast majority of the rest of it, but 70% are still driving diesel vehicles or are still, we've not really solved the problem. We've solved it on a spreadsheet, but the world is still not in a great place. So I'm not really answering your question because it's very complicated in that sense. What we need is the space to be able to say, actually, yes, we need to do this, but we need resource also to check that by responding here, we're not making things worse in this other sphere.
And so finally, just to ask Rachel, I suppose, the perennial issue for Irish people thinking about infrastructure is, the difficulty of getting through the planning network. Where are we on that now? There's a new planning act, there's new beefed up Board Pleanála, there's better planning courts and all of that. There is sort of stuff happening. Is there any evidence that this is transforming the environment?
That's a very tricky question, Richard.
It's probably what I was paid to.
It's too early yet to say whether it can make a difference or not, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
I think the new Planning Act is new. But you're right, planning is a challenge for all delivery agencies, and no matter what infrastructure that you're involved in. I think probably a major project might have taken 7 years from start to finish. Previously, it's now probably taking double the length of time due to planning, but also judicial reviews and challenges that are part and parcel of delivering infrastructure at the moment. So I can't really answer your question to say, have I any evidence as to whether it's making a difference? We certainly like things to be more move more quickly, for sure. And our Metrolink, we're still waiting for the decision from Board Pleanála on Metrolink. We recently submitted our, as I said, the railway order for Lewis Finglas. So we live in hope, but it's out of our hands. So our job is to get it in as quickly as we can, answer whatever questions come out, and all of that. That's our job, but unfortunately we have to wait. So I don't have the answer.
No, it is a tricky one.
It's a challenge, a big challenge.
Well, Bus Connects in my patch is held up because of the location of one bus stop, which is very. So without further ado, I'll throw out questions, and I'll favour people in the hall first. So I'll start with the lady here in the front, and then Tom, and then Donald.
I'm Sarah Carey. I work with Rachel, so I can't ask her a question. So I'll put it to Stephen. Stephen, you've worked in several different markets, Canada, America, and that. And in terms of both models they have for building infrastructure, and the culture that they have an attachment to different kinds of transport. Do you see any commonalities between Ireland and other markets, either in terms of, you know, what we share or how we're distinctive and maybe particularly obstructive to changing behaviour? And then another one, Richard, I hope you'd forgive me if I might ask you a question as one of the most experienced ministers in the country, and a good one too, I think most people would agree. The point that Stephen made about you know, how projects tend to get siloed both between agencies, within sectors, and across the whole infrastructure world. You know, do you see, is there any kind of possibility to change that culture and have a network system where there are coordinated decisions coming from central government that might help us all move things along?
Well, we were sort of chatting about this over lunch, and what seemed to me a rather hopeful thing that Stephen said was that in Canada, is it?
Yeah.
They have a sort of a step back review process that doesn't just look at how's the project going, but looks at, is it achieving the wider goals that we intended? You know, will the community have a school to go to? Will they have a bus to ride on? Will there be childcare? And I don't think we've anything like that. I think even at local level, our local government is remarkably siloed. You know, you don't have Dublin Port, you know, talking to the city manager, talking to the manager of Dublin Bus in any sort of forum where, you know, these sort of integrated thinking could occur. So I think that's a hopeful route to explore. But Stephen will have to tell us, give us the quotes of how it works.
So Sarah, I've never come across a place quite like Ireland. Look, North America is a very special case. Like they're very new, right? And their assets and their communities are, you know, they don't have the deep roots of our embedded inertia that we have here. Like the closest we've got is probably the UK, but even the UK surprises us, you know, in terms of how fast they can move sometimes, and you know, how extensive their programmatic approach can be. Like, you know, if there's a commitment in the UK to get something done, it'll get done very rapidly. But if I take the North American example, what we experienced around 2014, 2015 there was a realization that the transportation system was creating ghettos, that it was holding back economic development in a way that, you know, you would have heard about all these cities starting to sprawl. An awful lot of sprawl is just endemic of the fact that there's nothing to anchor communities around. And then like public transport in particular was bus based, and it was seen as, you know, being for the lower classes and all those kinds of things that we tried to avoid. Higher order transport wasn't invested in because it wasn't seen as being necessary. But what they have in North America and Canada in particular is they had the ability to change their policy position really quickly at the local level. So at municipal level, they were able to come in, they were able to say, do you know what, we're going to do a complete land plan here. That over there, that's for housing. That over there, that's for agriculture. Don't like it, move to another city. You know, they go and they say, we're going to be this particular tech type. That's what the universities are going to spend their time on. That's the kind of industry we're going to go and look for to come in. And we're going to compete with Toronto or Calgary. And we're going to be the AI capital, as an example. And they can just do that. You don't see any of that happening at our local level, right? We don't know who we want to be from an industry perspective. We're off-takers an awful lot of the time of national FDI plans. And we're hopefully going to get a land planning thing, strategy, I think they're calling it, at some point. Like it is being worked on, and I'm sure there'll be fights about it for years, because that's kind of what happens in this country. But like, we need to get there. We need to get there for all sorts of reasons outside of transport, including renewable energy and other things. So it has to be part of what we actually crack in the next 5 years if we're going to be successful.
Okay, I take Tom Ferris and Donald O'Brien, and I'll come to you. I have one online here I might throw in before I come.
Thank you, Richard. Tom Ferris, active member of a number of IEA committees. Observation / question, and then a very specific question. The observation / really comes from Stephen talking about the flexibility. And I asked this in the context of having been part of the Transport 21 team, and they produced a wonderful government report in November 2005, 34 billion. Problem was very soon after the fiscal crisis. So it is the flexibility you talked about, the need for scenario planning, foresight planning. So there might be a little response on that. And then my very specific question is to turn around to the audience. How many people came here by public transport today? And that's not a loaded question. That's a good answer. Myself, yes.
Active travel. Okay, Donald. Yeah.
Donald O'Brolacon, I'm a member of the Institute. My interest in transport stems from leading a residents association campaign to have the port tunnel built, even though it went under some of our members' houses, because we saw it as one of a set of mutually reinforcing measures that would enhance our city and our area by improving traffic management. We got the tunnel, we didn't get the rest. And hence my question. A couple of weeks ago on Morning Ireland, the project leader, country project director of ACOM talked about a programmatic approach to projects. And my question to Rachel and Stephen in particular is, given what we heard from Rachel, to what extent can the Metrolink project be regarded as part of a programmatic approach when it will not be interlinked with the other two, interoperable with the other two existing rail-based system in our capital city? Secondly, it will not lead to improved experience and supply chains needed for the other Lewis projects that Rachel referred to. And so basically, we're talking about a prosperous Ireland, but our public transport is beset by feuding public sector baronies who are incapable of being forced or working together, and where our elected representatives will not take action to force them to work together. I just add one other thing about data. Metrolink is put forward as a major project connecting Dublin City to the airport. Over 70% of the people, airport passengers, are traveling for leisure or visiting family and friends, so they're not time pressed. Only 25% of airport passengers have destinations and origins in the city centre, and that's according to NTA reports. It's interesting, Stephen, that the NTA stopped publishing data on the origin and destination of landside passengers at Dublin Airport, even though they collected the data in 2016 and in 2022. They have not published it as they did in 2001 and 2011.
Thanks very much. There are two questions that have come in online. One is from Alan Dukes about the local link and whether the 3-year contracts that they're now on, are they going to become a more permanent feature of our system? And another question came from David Dodd, who's asking about enforcement of, priority where it's given, bus lanes, parking, so on. How good are we on the enforcement side of things? So over to whoever. Do you want to start, Rachel? I think you're.
Okay, so there's a number of things in all of that. So I'll start with the last first. So the enforcement, absolutely, that's key for the successful implementation of the safety cameras that are being discussed at the minute. We are developing a safety enforcement strategy on behalf of the department that's in train, so that it will probably be finished, I'd say, Q1 of this year. Obviously that's strategy, and then it looks, oh, thank you. And then it's about implementing the strategy. So there's a number of different stakeholders involved. There's the Department of Transport, there's the Road Safety Authority, there's Garda Síochána, there's the Department of Justice, and there's ourselves. So a number of different stakeholders are feeding into that strategy and in turn will feed into the implementation plan, successful enforcement of the enforcement plan. The local link, that's probably not for me. It's probably more a question to the NTA. So I don't have an answer for that.
Fair enough. Excellent.
But I will say, I mean, part of the overriding, and it's something what Stephen was talking about earlier, not so much the mobility as a service, but it's connected, the whole integrated mobility. And that's something that we're really trying to deliver across all the different agencies, whether it's the department or whether it's ourselves or the NTA or whomever, our bus area. It's all about integrated mobility. So I can only imagine that the local links will continue, but I don't know for sure. More than to talk about the Metrolink, I think, and
my question was not directed to you.
Oh, thank you.
TII position is. I attended the oral hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So I don't think it's up to, yeah, so that's just up to our vendor. Stephen, do you want to?
Okay.
They're specific.
I think maybe just to reinforce a message on mobility as a service, and in the context of Metrolink, and look, don't take this flippantly, because it's not meant to be. But we need different modes of transportation in order to move different types of people in different ways. Now, that's not a comment to say that Metrolink is all right or all wrong. It's not actually a project for the airport, but the airport's on it, right? And there's lots that might come of it. And there was lots, I suppose. I remember a day where it was kind of, identified that Dublin was the one capital city that didn't have an airport link, for example, and that somehow justified Metrolink. It's not really. And look, the project obviously has been through a number of iterations and evolutions, and it used to go all the way down to the south side and all that kind of carry on, right? And I don't want to get into that, but it is almost undeniable. I won't say it's totally undeniable because there'll still be people that will deny it. It is almost undeniable that without Metrolink's carrying capacity and the frequency at which it can carry that many people, we will face a scenario in Dublin where it'll clog up in 10 years. It's already bad, right? There's modeling to suggest that if we only do bus connects and we don't do Metrolink, it's going to be bad. It's going to be tough out there. You don't
Published.
Yeah, it'll be in the business cases for these documents.
Sorry,
It'll be in the business cases for these documents. They'll be part of the.
who's doing the biggest?
Oh, right. Yeah. Oh, right. We need to get you a column, a mic. Just for a quick comment, because I have a speaker.
Sorry, are you saying that a proper modelling of Metrolink versus a bus-based alternative has been done?
Well, so that has been done. So the preliminary business case would have.
Sorry?
The preliminary business case for Metrolink, which is published, will point out that the other modes and options have been evaluated.
Sorry, that's the preliminary business case commissioned by the project promoters.
By TII, yeah.
Okay, and who is doing the definitive business case?
TII.
Oh, really?
Okay. Do you want to deal with the planning issue that Tom raised?
Tom, can you repeat your point on the planning issue?
My point? What was my point?
What's it about? Creating a strategy that accommodates.
And I look at the academic on this, there are foresight scenarios.
Oh, yeah.
It is having, and it emanated from Stephen's point, it is, you can't be so definitive that this is the way we are going. You need the flexibility and you need the alternative scenarios that Colin McCarthy's looking for as well.
Okay. Do you want to
go, Debbie?
Sure, I'll go first and then you can follow up if you want. So, I mean, the scenarios, absolutely. I think the flexibility, what you're describing as well around mobility as a service, around integrated transport systems, around electric, it's about having, opening up possibilities, right? Opening up opportunities. If you just build roads, absolutely, as you said before, they will fill. We'll have more congestion in 5-10 years' time. So it's opening up possibilities. It's not saying every person has to be on an e-scooter. As somebody that's never been on an e-scooter and probably will never go on one, you know, there's different opportunities for different people. It makes a more rounded transport system. And I think that your scenarios that you're describing are very much part of this. It's about coming back to this idea of what is Prosperous Ireland? What do we want as the city of Dublin? What do we want as a country? Who are we speaking to? And actually, scenario building is one approach. Backcasting is a different approach. So backcasting encourages you to do that visioning and say, right, this is the world that we're looking to move towards. And if we move backwards, these are the different scenarios for next week. And then we move backwards. So we're actually working towards a goal. And actually, that's quite a nice strategy because it says we recognize there's not one pathway there, but we are all working towards, a prosperous island, whatever we think that might be.
Yeah.
Very much. We've about 10 minutes left. So yeah, yourself. I'll take 3 here. Yeah.
Thank you. So, hi, everyone. So my name is Beatriz Martinez Pastor. I'm an assistant professor in transport and also the director for the Center of Critical Infrastructures that we have at UCD. So we have been talking about transport systems and how important they are on our daily life. So they are impacting in everything that we do. But we know that they become even more important when extreme events are happening, when any disruption is happening on the network. And you have briefly talked a bit about resilience and how important it is that we create this type of resilience transport system. So my question is Ireland doing enough to future-proof and to try to prepare our infrastructures against climate change, particularly the transportation system? So I would like to know a bit about your opinions from your different.
Very good. This lady in the front.
Hi, everyone. My question is basically to Stephen. I'm Abhi. I'm a senior consultant with Deloitte India currently, and I've worked with the Government of India on deployment of electric vehicles, and where we have studied the integration of digital solutions along with the deployment of such vehicles. I wanted to ask, are there any enormous challenges that the country today is facing that can, derail us from the path of deployment in terms of digital integration in sustainable transport systems?
Okay, I'll take Lorcan, yeah.
Thank you. And thank you to the panel for a very interesting presentation. Lorcan O'Connor, CIE Group. If I may, just an observation on what we've just discussed. I do think if you look at public transport as a whole, we are pretty much operating at capacity, whether that's heavy rail, light rail, or indeed the bus network. You look at somewhere like Swords, the size of Limerick, or even more than that, it needs high capacity, as does the airport, as does other areas in which it serves. And when you look at the map of the likes of Metro, there is a high degree of integration with the Dart line, with Lewis lines, as well as Bus Connects corridors and so on. And there is going to be integrated ticketing. Indeed, it's largely there already with Leap Card. So certainly if one is financially constrained, business case comparisons are very important in terms of which projects you prioritize. But we've been talking about the fact that we are suffering from not making that very long-term kind of decisions and investments that are needed for a prosperous Ireland. And I think, with that in mind, something like the likes of the Metrolink is critically important. But if I may then just to my own question, we talk Prosperous Ireland. Housing is one of the biggest challenges that we face at the moment. And I'd be interested in the panel's views just on the extent to which transport-orientated development needs to lead on that. We know we need to be building 40, 50,000 houses a year. My concern would be that if we don't get that TOD-led development, we're going to be building houses that have space for 2 cars each, that will necessitate kids being driven to school rather than cycling or walking and so on, and that we don't learn from past mistakes.
I'll take this man at the back and then go to the panel.
Really interesting talk, sir, to the whole panel. Himself, Richard. Just had a question about the recent judgment. I think it was a High Court judgment about a wind farm that put the the Climate Act as a much higher priority than other priorities that have been in the planning application. So there was I think it was Justice Humphreys made a judgment striking down denial of a permission for a wind farm. I was wondering, would that as a precedent influence how we think about transport? In other words, we know that building more roads, has been said, induces more demand for motor transport and similar points. Do you think that that highlighting of the Climate Act will have a broader influence on transport, our transport priorities, especially with the new program for government that's a lot less focused on active transport and public transport than the previous one? Thanks.
Thanks very much. So over to who wants to start with the building in resilience?
Well, I can start on that. Question. So yeah, so climate adaptation resilience is a key work stream that we are obviously working very proactively on. It's a proactive work stream, I guess. We published our climate adaptation strategy at the end of 2022. And then we published our initial climate risk assessments, I think at the end of 2023. Sorry, could just be me. So we have a number of documents on our website in terms of how we are approaching climate adaptation, and we continue on that journey. It's quite intensive work, labor intensive, the climate risk assessments, and we are hoping to be in a position to publish our climate adaptation implementation plan at the end of this year. So that, I think, to answer your question. And then obviously that's climate adaptation, but the ongoing, and I know you referenced it earlier, Stephen, the ongoing asset management and resilience work that's required is just so important, and it's a huge priority for us across. As I said, the national road network is 5,500 kilometers, and it's just part of our day-to-day, but we can never take it for granted. But the extreme weather, that's where climate adaptation and resilience comes into play.
We're coming towards the end. I think the data question was towards you, was it?
Data question. I just want to build on Rachel's as well, just to say, look, the national network, centrally controlled, focus on sustainability and climate, very high priority, driven by central government. Way too many trees close to the road network on the tertiary and the secondary, which we experienced during the storm. An awful lot of, well, that's the landowners' problems, that's local authorities. Local authorities are not funded to deal with that stuff. So there is an element of, outside of the centrally controlled transportation network, there needs a bit more focus on what does resilience mean, because an awful lot of communities were cut off right in the last storm. There's no denying it, right? It wasn't a problem with the national network. It wasn't, well, there was some problems in Irish Rail and stuff like that, but like they were solvable, you know? On the digital integration stuff, it's kind of the same challenge. The challenge is that it's multiple owners of the potential data sources and data uses that not necessarily talking to each other. You pick a line that's owned by Irish Rail, you're dealing with Irish Rail, you can do something on that, or you can deal with the national network, you can deal with TII and others to put the data sources in place. Go into a town? No, not at all, right? There's between ESB, the township itself, various parties, the telecoms, who control an awful lot of our movement data, and that's spread across 4 or 5. So the big challenge, the barrier, is that there's nothing to compel them all to share that information so that you could build systems on it that would actually work. Instead, you need this massive integration that really holds things back.
So Debbie, do you want to comment on this idea of transport-led development?
Sure, yeah. I mean, the housing issue, I mean, arguably, housing is the biggest challenge for transport and for thinking about our transport system in the future, because it's the way that we're locking in practices. You know, when we think about behaviour change, like you say, if we give people driveways, we give them a garage, research shows that the likelihood of them owning cars increases if we don't give them access to public transport infrastructure and so on. Also thinking about future needs around apartments, thinking outside of, you know, when I was in Aotearoa, it was really hard to get people beyond a quarter-acre house with a garage and a garden and so on. Actually thinking about what people in the future might want, thinking about energy prices, actually living in smaller homes, changes to family makeup and so on. What does that housing system look like? And actually having it joined up in such a way where we're thinking about schools and we're thinking about hospitals and we're we're thinking about supermarkets, that we don't end up with people isolated in communities, detached from everything that they need. Absolutely, this needs to be part of it. And there's groups in the UK doing a lot of good work trying to link it up. I don't know what it's like here in Ireland, but I've got a sense that it might be similar to the UK, where the housing development seems to happen in isolation from many of the transport plans.
Well, and it's worse because they're both in a planning system that's at different times and different scales. That's the one thing. But also it's, look, and have some sympathy for developers. There's an element of they want to sell the house.
Yeah.
So you can't sell a house without a driveway or a garage unless you're guaranteed to get high quality, on time, predictable, high frequency public transport into that neighborhood that's going to carry the capacity that it needs to go. And ultimately, that public-private partnership dialogue, we don't really have a good forum for that, especially at that kind of level, right? So
Can I ask Debbie, like we have the most under-occupied housing stock in the country. People of my vintage, 96% of us are living in buildings that are excessive for our needs. Has any country, and most of these homes are well located, close to transport hubs, has any country successfully looked at how you could allow people to convert, you know, conventional 3 or 4 bedroom homes into duplex, or you know, do things that would be a bit more innovative? Like it's a massive stock of housing that could we tap into even a portion of it, but it's you know, people see red when anyone mentions it.
I don't know any examples.
I bought a house in Edmonton 5 years ago called 146B, and there was 146A. And when I told somebody in the city of Edmonton that I bought 146B, they knew exactly what house it was. It was the first infill-based development, splitting a lot. And it had objections from everyone in the neighborhood because, well, if you do this to all the lots, you'll double the amount of people, and riffraff like me can afford the house, all that kind of stuff. And it was important, right? Like they had an infill strategy in that city to do exactly that, Richard, to create the capacity without sprawl. We haven't tackled that at all in this country, and you can imagine, you know, giving up little bits of your garden has been trouble in this country, right? So it has, but that need and that conversation hasn't happened yet, because I think in a way we haven't actually met the expectations of just building new houses. If we can get to that expectation of the building the new houses, then I think that infill conversation will follow rapidly afterwards, because the city of Dublin needs it, right? Like the city of Dublin needs more vibrancy in the inner suburbs again and stuff like that.
So thanks very much indeed. It's 2:13 and Stephen is going to wrap up. Sorry, Shane Mohan is going to wrap up on behalf of Deloitte. He is the head of public sector in Deloitte.
Great. Richard, thanks very much. Yeah, really enjoyed the presentation. I think the word that kept running through my mind as I listened was interconnectedness. And I'm not talking about the interconnectedness of the modes of different transport infrastructure that we put in place. Clearly, that's very, very important. But really what I've been thinking all through the conversation is the impact on our society, our economy, our way of life, our cultural way of life, our different communities, how we bring those with us. And of course, the climate implications, both the positive and the negative one of all of the decisions that have to be made in relation to our transport infrastructure. So those decisions are important. They're pretty critical for us all. They're complex, and indeed they're also emotive, because they do impact on every one of us and our families. You know, so from a Deloitte point of view, we are absolutely, you know, really, really pleased that we can contribute to this debate, but also to facilitate and enable forums like this, where people can come together and to share ideas. So maybe just on behalf of Stephen and myself, a couple of very, very brief thank yous. Firstly to Alex, Barry, Keane, and all of the team here in the Institute for been fantastic hosts as always, and for the organisation, which is always first rate. So that's very, very much appreciated. To the panel and speakers, to Rachel, Debbie and Richard, of course, our chair, for your time and coming here today. And also to Sheila and Aisling from our Deloitte team as well, for all their work behind the scenes. So I hope everyone really enjoyed it. I certainly did. And lots more to follow, I'm sure. Thank you, everyone.
So that's it, over now. Thanks for those who joined us online as well as those who are here. Take care, safe home.